Hello, everyone. I'm Martin Skane, probably better known to forum users as Port Perrin. You've probably seen me on the forum fairly regularly. I'm also joined this morning by fellow modeler and organizer and another well-known forum member who I'll let introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Mike Hills, end bodger on the forum. Quite a new member, only been just over a year, but here we are.
Okay, so we're joined for this very special interview this morning by a well-respected and well-known personality from the railway modelling world, editor of Railway Modeller, judge of the Great Model Railway Challenge, and much more. It's hello to Steve Flint.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a good time.
Lovely. Well, it's so good of you to spare the time with us this morning, Steve. I know you're very busy, but I'm just going to start off with a few very, very simple, gentle questions for you. First one, what started your interest in railways and where?
Well, you say that's a simple question, but the answer is quite a complicated one. So, in a nutshell, it all began in Scarborough, where I was born, and I lived in a house which was just across the road from the steam locomotive shed down Seymour Road in Scarborough. That's where my father worked as a fireman in the 1950s. And we also had a little allotment between us and the loco shed just across the road too. So steam railways back in the 1950s were very much a part of my life. I can remember my dad coming home from work with his bicycle clips on his overall bottoms to stop the coal dust and ash going up his trousers, and Mum would make him get changed in the backyard in those days, you know. But that was the real railway influence. In the early 1960s, on the seafront at Scarborough, on the promenade there was an exhibition of model railways put on by a chap called Harold Elliott, who was a bit of a travelling showman in those days. He would take his layout to various localities and set them up for a summer season. And at least for 2, possibly 3 summer seasons in Scarborough, he set up his display. And this display included an O-gauge, 3-rail, large layout. I seem to remember a sort of lake or pond in the middle where everybody chucked the pennies. So that was probably another way he collected his revenue. But interestingly, he ran a little session called Sammy the Shunter. And Sammy the Shunter was a bit like Thomas the Tank Engine, really. And what he did was he got this little shunter to act in an unruly manner, and the shunter would block the main line. And of course, the big A4 Express was on its way down. And in order to get the shunter to move, he would hit it with a rolled up newspaper. You know, all the kids thought this was absolutely fantastic. And that kind of fun we just don't see anywhere anymore today. So I went several times to this display. Again, as I say, sometime in the early 1960s on the front at Scarborough. My grandfather took me on several occasions. So there was a very big influence on my early years of model railways. And of course, as a result, I wanted my own train set. We had the Triang Hornby train set on a 6x4 board in my bedroom as a youngster. And that kept a reasonable amount of interest throughout my early years. Now, we moved to Hull in about 1967, and a smaller bedroom ensued. So it got put to one side for a little bit. But shortly after that, in 1968, I purchased a copy of Railway Modeller. Ironically, I'd gone back to Scarborough with the family for a longer day out to see our grandparents who still live there. And this model shop was on Castle Road in Scarborough. And I purchased this Railway Modeller, and inside was an amazing replica of a rail branch line terminus. It was Coalport in Shropshire. It was a LNW period layout at the time, but this was like a model railway. I'd never ever seen anything before. It was a true miniature replica of the old station at Coalport, and I was absolutely hooked. And since that day, July 1968 edition it was, I've never really looked back. I've been fascinated by model railways all along. And my journey, which is long and convoluted and which would take up far too much time to tell you today, has brought me to the Railway Modeller editorship. That's been a long and, as I say, long and convoluted journey with many twists and turns, many high points, many low points. So that's possibly for another time. But that's basically where my passion and my interest in railways and model railways comes from.
Brilliant. That was a tremendous answer. And you mentioned your model railway when you were a child. Do you have one now?
Well, I've had several model railways through the intervening 50 years. Somebody just sent me an email by the sounds of it. Through the intervening 50 odd years. I joined Hull Miniature Railway Society. I don't know whether you've visited them yet, Michael, but...
no, I haven't.
They're in Walton Street. All the club rooms are shut at the moment. So I joined Hull Miniature Railway Society in about 69, November 69, I think it was. And spent a lot of time working on the various model railway projects they had. Meanwhile, at home, and actually, as I must point out, that I was still at school in 1970, and a friend of mine at school introduced me to narrow gauge, the Tallyclin Railway, and we did 2 seasons volunteering in a 2-week stint on the Tallyclin. So I got a bit of a liking for narrow gauge as well. And in the early 70s, I started a little 009 layout. There's 2 or 3 photographs of it still exist. So I've not got them to hand, I'm afraid. But some of the items, including the track, the 18-inch lengths of Pico 009 track, I still have to this day. And I do intend, and in fact, I am actually building a 009 layout as one of the projects that I've got lined up for my retirement years. So during, as I said, during the intervening years, I did a lot with Hull Miniature Railway Society. I also built 2 exhibition layouts virtually single-handedly with the help of some fellow members of the Hull Miniature Railway Society. One was called Kyle of Tongue. This was a Scottish terminus layout set in BR 1970s up in North Scotland. And that became quite successful. And it went to many exhibitions, including the big country show, the big countrywide shows, Whalley, York, Manchester, and in those days, the International Model Railway Exhibition, IMREX. That was quite successful. So I did get to know an awful lot of modelers in that time because I was, visiting all these shows. That sort of got slightly retired in about 1990. And I built an EM gauge layout after that. This was based in East Yorkshire. Michael, you're from East Yorkshire. You've probably heard of Reeton Village.
Yes, yes.
Yes, well, it never had a railway station, but I decided that it ought to have one. And I built this EM gauge layout of a would-be Reeton station. This was set in the 1980s, when just as the old blue was disappearing and the new large logo liveries were emerging, and traditional vacuum braked goods trains had more or less vanished, and I was running some Speedlink services in vans, and I had a couple of because it was Reeton in East Yorkshire where there's a lot of agriculture. I decided it would have a sort of grain drying complex and a loading plant for malt to go into the Scottish malt distillers polybulk wagons and off to Scotland for distilling malt whiskey. So that was the theme of that one. Now, both these layouts ended up getting sold, and the layouts still exist. And rather ironically, the first one, Kyle of Tongue, I sold to a chap in Oxford, and he moved subsequently down to Bridport, which is barely 15 miles down the coast from me. And I have seen him. He's popped into the Railway Modeller HQ at Beer a couple of times, and he's told me all about it. And I have been hoping to pop down and see him, but of course things have been put on hold for a while now with the pandemic. So that still exists. It was built in the early 1980s, and he's still got it in his house in Bridport, which is, you know, quite an accolade, I suppose. Reeton, on the other hand, I sold in 2002 to a chap in Southampton. He turned up in a Ford Transit van, and we loaded it up into the back. He gave me the balance of the fee in £20 notes wrapped up in an elastic band, which was a little bit incongruous. And he shot off into the sunset, so to speak. And this roll of £20 notes with an elastic band sort of sat on the kitchen table, and you just think, well, crikey, was that it? All that blood, sweat, and tears building this layout, and it ends up as a roll of 20s. Anyway, that layout has since had a sort of second life on the Southern Exhibition Circuit and has been owned by a couple of people. And last I heard of it, it was in the possession of a member of the Yeovil Model Railway Club who lives down here as well. So that layout is barely 20 odd miles away from me as well. So it's really quite weird, isn't it, that these two layouts I've built in a 40 odd years span are kind of following me round the country. So where it will all end, I don't know. So that's it, basically. Yes, it was a very long answer to a very short question. I've had several layouts, and I'm currently working on a 009 layout, and I've got other projects in mind. I've always wanted to do a Northeastern Railway branch line, so that's on the cards. Well, there's several Northeastern Railway projects, so I might be down in Great Western Territory, but I haven't left my roots of the Northeastern Railway.
I like the sound of that, Great Western, and I like the grain trains that you alluded to, because that's one of my other passions on which I spend far too much money, and that's single malt Scotch whisky. But that's another story. Anyway, my last question for this little bit, very simple question: what's your favourite class of locomotive?
Oh, that's a really tricky one, but yes, it's a really tricky one, is that, because I do like them all, but I probably do like the. This is harking back to the Scottish 1970s scene, of course, but I do like the BR Sulzers and the Birmingham Sulzers. You know, the class 24s, 25s, 26s, and 27s. I travelled behind them quite a lot in the 1970s and photographed them. And of course, yeah, I would probably, if somebody said, what's your favourite diesel, I'd probably go for that series of diesels. Steam locomotive wise, well, that's a real broad brush, but it would probably be a Northeastern or a North British or perhaps a Scottish Great North of Scotland 440 or something like that. But to pin me down and ask me what my favourite one is a real tricky question. But I do like the Edwardian steamers.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mike now.